People in the devastated Florida Keys now returning to see what is left of their homes as 5 people are confirmed dead in a South Florida nursing home that had no power. Good morning to you. I'm John Scott.
It is such a horrific story. New at this hour, I'm Melissa Francis, and FEMA saying 90% of homes on the Keys were damaged, and 1 in 4 homes on the Fragile Island chain were destroyed. A woman who decided to ride out the storm saying it was terrifying.
I stayed in the bathroom, me and my girlfriend Donna, we stayed in the bathroom in the hallways. It was, for 2 days, it was hell. You didn't know if you were going to make it or not.
Go ahead.
Meantime, there are 5 deaths reported at a nursing home in Hollywood, Florida. Now, this is not in the boonies. This is basically a suburb of Fort Lauderdale. WSVN, our Fox affiliate in South Florida, giving us these helicopter pictures where more than 100 residents had to be evacuated and 5 deaths have been confirmed. Now, they apparently have no power there as a result of the hurricane, and the heat in South Florida intense even in September.
They're now launching a criminal investigation into this to see exactly what happened, this horrific finding. And we also heard officials in the last hour saying that they are sending people out to check all of the nursing homes that are in the city of Hollywood to make sure that this hasn't happened in other places.
Meantime, you have to figure they'll be looking at residential facilities for the elderly all across the state of Florida after something like this, because so much of the state is without power. 2/3 of the state, 2/3 of the customers in the state were lacking power in the immediate aftermath of Hurricane Irma. And it's going to take maybe 10 days to 2 weeks to get everything back online. So obviously in a situation like this, where you have people who are susceptible to environmental conditions, and you have no power, you have no air conditioning. And that's what the concern is right now.
Yeah, absolutely. Frightening times.
In the meantime, our Griff Jenkins is live in Marco Island, Florida, where Irma made its second Florida landfall. Griff, what's the situation today?
Well, John, you know, the people here on Marco Island were lucky. There were 0 deaths reported. It's certainly ravaged buildings, crushed, boats lying in yards, but it's very much a much better story than that of the Keys that we're hearing so much about. The Monroe County Sheriff Rick Ramsey confirming 3 fatalities down there. The sheriff speaking with our own Phil Keating, saying that the roads are a mess, saying that it looked like a nuclear bomb had gone off south of that mile marker 15. Here's how the sheriff described it to Phil Keating. Take a listen.
When I first came out after the hurricane, we came on the roads. You couldn't even drive anywhere. The entire road was full of boats and cars and trailers and sheds. The roads were impassable. We used front-end loaders and bulldozers just to clear a 1-lane path to get police cars past. But devastation is you'll see structures that are just one there, one aren't gone.
Now, residents, of course, getting into the upper Keys up in Key Largo, Tavernier, and Isla Mirada. But down in those lower Keys, it is still very much a crisis. The sheriff also telling Phil that, you know, hospitals down in Key West not open. They don't have water. They don't have power. They don't have fuel. They don't have cell service. Very difficult situation as they try and get some people still in there. They have, I'm told, opened up the Key West airport for emergency crews so they can get supplies in. But that situation very much still playing out at this hour, John.
Griff Jenkins reporting from Marco Island, Florida. Griff, thank you.
So just in on the White House push for bipartisan tax reform, with the president now gearing up for a new meeting with more than a dozen Democratic and Republican lawmakers after his dinner last night with a group of senators from both sides of the aisle. Sarah Sanders, White House press secretary, addressed this at the briefing yesterday.
The president, I think, has demonstrated both in his business world and as president that he can make deals, and that's certainly what he's looking to do, and he's going to work hard to make sure that we get the best deal possible on tax reform. And I think that starts with things like tonight, having this conversation and moving that ball forward, working bipartisan support from both sides.
Chief White House correspondent John Roberts is live with the story now. John.
Melissa, good morning to you. The president, about 2 o'clock this afternoon, will be meeting with about a dozen, maybe a little more, moderate members of the House on both sides of the aisle, many of them members of the so-called Problem Solvers Caucus. The president will be talking to them about a number of items on his agenda for the fall. And among those agenda items, of course, will include tax reform, also what to do about DACA, and maybe even another push to try to reform health care. The president's willingness to cut a deal with Democratic leaders Chuck Schumer and Nancy Pelosi, there you see them in the Oval Office last week, really sent shockwaves through the Republican Party. This morning, the president's chief counselor, Kellyanne Conway, said, "Welcome to the new Washington."
He has come to Washington as a disruptor, but he was a successful businessman, non-politician for decades, and he brings those skill sets and that effectiveness to bear on this job, in that he's an excellent negotiator, excellent listener, and wants anybody who's going to support his agenda on behalf of all Americans who he is committed to representing, he wants them to come to the table.
You mentioned that bipartisan dinner the president had last night. Among the attendees, you see there West Virginia Senator Joe Manchin. He said this morning that he could sign on to the right formula for tax reform, and that if the president wants to get tax reform through, he may have to abandon conservatives and shoot for the middle. Listen here.
There's a few moderate conservative Democrats like myself. I say I'm fiscally responsible and socially compassionate. And I think a perfect scenario would be, can you get 30 Republicans and 30 Democrats? We're not going to get the far fringes, Bill. It's not going to happen.
The president also making it clear through his budget director, Mick Mulvaney, just a short time ago, that tax reform must reduce the corporate tax rate to 15%. Here's Mulvaney earlier.
We'll go to whoever will help us get it down to 15%. The president and I just talked not 15 minutes ago, and he's adamant about this 15% rate.
Short time ago, Speaker Paul Ryan said he is positive that the president will pursue a conservative tax reform proposal. However, his legislative affairs director, Mark Short, said yesterday that what the president learned from the Obamacare debacle is that he cannot rely on members of his own party to get his legislative agenda across the goal line. But mark this, Melissa, if he does intend to cut a deal with Democrats on tax reform, you can bet that there will likely be a lowering of the corporate tax rate, and there will be tax cuts for the middle class. But a big question mark is whether the upper income earners will get any kind of tax cut. Melissa?
And now we're hearing at this hour that the Daily Beast is reporting that Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer are going to be having dinner at the White House with the president potentially tonight. It'll be interesting to see if that happens. And boy, wouldn't you love to be a fly on the wall for that one? I'm
telling you, he's going to cut deals with people who he thinks he can get success with. By the way, the details of the tax reform legislation, we're supposed to get those the week of September 25th.
Interesting. All right. Can't wait for that. A lot going on. John Roberts, you got all of it. Thank you.
Thanks.
Interesting guest list at the White House these days. For more on all of this, let's bring in Jake Sherman, senior writer for Politico and co-author of Politico's Playbook. So you had 3 moderate Democrats in at the White House for dinner last night. You have, at least according to Sam Stein from the Daily Beast, you have Chuck Schumer and Nancy Pelosi dining with the president tonight. Jake, what is going on?
Well, the president is clearly sees it in his interest to work with Democrats who seems more comfortable with and seems more in line with on a lot of key issues. Now, I will point out a few notes of skepticism, as I usually do. He needs Republicans to bring bills to the floor. If the president wants Democrats to be able to bring bills to the floor, he should help Democrats win the majority here on Capitol Hill. Republicans have the majority in the House and the Senate, so Democrats have very limited ability to get things through the legislature. That's number one. Number two, rank and file Republicans are not going to be happy, nor are they going to support the president cutting deals endlessly with Democrats. It's just, I mean, they won majorities in both chambers so they could govern, not so they could have a Republican president go behind their backs with Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer, who, by the way, Republicans have been campaigning against for the last decade. So this is kind of stunning stuff. I'm not intimating that this is, going to be the deal of the century, but I do think this is significant to keep in mind that the president, who lambasted Chuck Schumer and Nancy Pelosi a few months ago, seems perfectly willing to cut deals with them.
Right, and interesting, the 3 Democratic senators who dined with the president last night are the only 3 Democrats who did not sign a tax reform letter that Chuck Schumer sent to the president about a month ago, outlining the demands that Democrats had for tax reform. So you might see that as part of the reason those 3 got invited last night. Now all of a sudden tonight it's going to be Chuck Schumer and Nancy.
Well, actually, think about it this way. Joe Manchin, Heidi Heitkamp, and Joe Donnelly, who were all at the White House last night, are all from states that President Trump won. They all could now go home and say, I'm not a partisan Democrat. I'm not a Republican. I'm not a partisan Democrat, but I'm willing to work with the president when our interests align and when it's good for the people of West Virginia or Indiana or North Dakota. That's a pretty stunning thing that Democrats now could able to say. President Trump has handed 3 Democrats a talking point in their 2018 campaign. Yeah. So that's an important thing, and we shouldn't underestimate that. The substantive level, if I had to guess, these 3 Democrats are not going to be for the Republican tax package. But at the end of the day, they could go home and they could say, listen, I'll meet with the president. His door is open to me. I have met with him. I've talked to him, and he's here for me when I need to get things done for my state. A very powerful message for Senate Democrats.
You have an interesting item in the playbook this morning that suggests Democrats may be a little too giddy about their prospects in the 2018 elections and 2020, that despite the president's unpopularity ratings, it doesn't seem particularly good for Democrats as well.
Well, Democrats have not been able to kind of knock Trump down a notch, which they thought they would be able to do. His disapproval ratings are low, rather, but he has not been. The Democrats have not been able to kind of knock him off his perch with the voters that matter. But I think more immediately, like if we look at 2018, Democrats are getting what they want, and that's important here on Capitol Hill for the balance of power. And I've talked to a lot of Republicans who have said to me in the last week, why are we handing the keys over to Democrats? We've waited a decade to get majorities and get the White House. Why is the president handing the keys over to Democrats? That's not what they want, and it's a bizarre dynamic that no one is comfortable with here on Capitol Hill.
It is keeping things interesting, gives you a lot to write about in the playbook. Jake Sherman, the lead author from Politico. Thank you.
Thank you.
That was a great interview. Interesting stuff there. Yeah.
Thanks.
All right, up next, more politics. Karl Rove is here to discuss the speculation about a 3rd major political party forming. Plus, North Korea seems unfazed by more UN sanctions, what they're doing in response, and Hollywood gathering to raise money for hurricane victims, but it turned political pretty quickly.
This is a pattern. This is real. This is not fake news.
So a new op-ed in the New York Times arguing that some members of the Republican Party may break off and create a 3rd party. The piece is blaming President Trump for getting caught between anti-establishment and Republican forces in Washington. Press Secretary Sarah Sanders responding to a question about GOP leaders of the Senate and House not wanting to follow President Trump's populist agenda.
The president's committed to working with Congress to get some big things done. We've got a very big agenda. The president wants to work with all members of Congress. Obviously, that includes Republican leadership as well as Democrats. I think you saw some of the president's leadership last week when he helped strike a deal to make sure that we got the funding that was necessary.
Karl Rove joins me now. He is the former deputy chief of staff for President George W. Bush. He is a Fox News contributor. What do you make of this thinking, Karl?
I think a little overblown on a number of grounds. First of all, very hard to start a 3rd party in America and be successful. Our state laws and the Electoral College are biased towards a 2-party system. Think about Ross Perot, got 19% of the vote when he first ran for president and got no Electoral College votes. Second of all, this is this is overblown because it assumes that the disruptive forces inside the Republican Party, whether they are the Freedom Caucus or the Bannon economic nationalists, which incidentally have distinctly different views of which way they want the country to go. This assumes that both of these groups have decided that they can't win control of the Republican Party, and so the only thing they're allowed to do is to go start a third one. Both of these groups, whether it's Bannon or the Freedom Caucus, still believe that they can take over the Republican Party and dominate it. So why give up a major party and start a new one if you think you still got a shot of taking over the
Let me make more of the argument
party.
from the article with more of the details that are in there, and you can knock it down. So this is a presidential historian who said that it used to be that basically you needed the blessing of party leaders in order to win the presidency. It was that kind of thinking that you had to be part of one of the two major parties. But now we had a political neophyte and a former Democrat who was resisted all through the primaries and basically didn't get the blessing of the party until the very end, if at all. That now entry is easy. Basically, all you need: money, TV, communications, and maybe one issue. The political game has just changed entirely. You disagree with that?
Well, look, I respect Michael Beschloss a lot. I disagree with him a little bit on this. We've seen insurgent candidates before take over political parties. Most of the time, those insurgent candidates, for example, William Jennings Bryan in 1896, they don't go on to win the presidency. But this one did, and I think it was because this candidate had more than... It's easy to say all you need is money and prestige and media and communications. Donald Trump has spent 20 years sort of making himself part and parcel of the American psyche by being a constant figure in New York, the center of the media in America, by having a popular TV show, by being outrageous, by being on the front pages as often as possible. I'm not certain that that's easy to duplicate.
Yeah.
Now, both political parties are being disrupted. Don't get me wrong. Nothing is hunky-dory with the Republicans or the Democrats. Both of them have populist insurgencies. Donald Trump got about 46% of the vote in the Republican primaries. Bernie Sanders got about 46% of the vote in the Democratic primaries. The difference was Trump was running against 16 candidates. Bernie Sanders was running against basically one.
Yeah.
So 46 wasn't good enough. But both political parties are being roiled. Both political parties are being disrupted.
Yep.
How this plays out is not yet certain, but I think it's unlikely to end in a third party.
And of course, you're so smart there. You knew exactly what presidential historian we were talking about, Carl. Let me ask you the quote from Bill Kristol then, from the Weekly Standard, saying that he thinks people are underestimating the extent to which the Republican Party could be in full-blown civil war by March or April of next year, maybe adding in what the president is doing now, meeting with Democrats and making deals with Democrats potentially. Does that push Republicans into even more of an internal civil war? And maybe do they lose the House as a result?
Yeah, look, I don't think that meeting with Democrats is necessarily a thing that causes a civil war. Smart presidents meet with leaders of the opposition party. They're the president of all the country, not just the president of their political party. So I think President Trump was doing belatedly a very smart thing by reaching out to Democrats. We can have a separate conversation about whether it was a good deal or a bad deal, but presidents ought to do that. Bill Kristol, I have one minor disagreement. I think we're already in civil war, and I've written about this in my column tomorrow for the Wall Street Journal. In July, one faction of the House Republicans, the Freedom Caucus, basically said, we're going to stop we may vote no on the budget resolution. We may vote with Nancy Pelosi on the budget resolution unless you, in essence, give us final authority to examine all the ideas that you're talking about for the tax reform bill and approve them or disapprove them in advance. Now, why is that important? Because, look, even if the president's successful in getting some Democrats to agree to support tax reform in the Senate, he's not going to get 8 Democrats to get to 60 and avoid a filibuster.
Yeah.
So this is going to have to be done under reconciliation, which means the House and Senate must both pass a budget resolution. The House Budget Committee has passed out a resolution, but the Freedom Caucus has said we're not going to vote for it.
Yeah, no, these are great points, Carl, and I can't wait to see your article tomorrow in the Wall Street Journal. Good plug. Can't wait for it. Thank you, my friend.
Thanks, Melissa.
Thank you.
You bet.
A sad note in the world of politics. Longtime former New Mexico Senator Pete Domenici has died. The son of Italian immigrants, he became the longest-serving U.S. senator in New Mexico's history. He died this morning at the age of 85.